Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. We have over 300,000 laws and regulations, but one short sentence covers moral behavior. The Golden Rule is such a simple rule, yet, if followed, we could rid the majority of the human-caused suffering on this planet. Imagine a world where we all treated others the way we want to be treated. Nobody would be assaulted, or robbed, or murdered, or raped. Morality gets really interesting when you apply the Golden Rule universally. Logic dictates that if you and I must follow the Golden Rule to be moral people, groups of people also must follow the Golden Rule. It is immoral if you or I murder someone, just the same as it is immoral if a group of people got together and murdered one person or another group of people. If groups of people are held to the same standards of morality, why not churches, businesses, and government institutions? These institutions are simply made up of groups of people too. Imagine that you work for a bank, and you and a group of your colleagues sold bonds that you knew to be worthless to a client. In this way, you and your colleagues defrauded the client, definitely breaking the Golden Rule. Ethically, this is no different than if you stole the same amount of money from the person's wallet. The fraud was immoral, whether our legal system deemed it legal or illegal. In this example, you might say that the bank is not immoral, it is simply the people involved. In some cases, I think you could make that argument, similar to the idea that knives are not immoral and that they can be used to prepare dinner, but they can also be used to kill people. It is not the knife, but the knife wielder who should be judged. In the case of the bank, I would argue that the business and the individuals involved in the fraud are immoral. If the business would likely continue to operate in an immoral way, even if the bad actors are removed, then there is something fundamentally immoral with the structure of the entity, in this case the bank. If they remove the bad actors, would the bank still use fractional reserve lending? Would the bank still benefiting from the counterfeiting of the Federal Reserve? Yes, and yes. What about a church? I suppose that depends on whether or not you believe the church's doctrine to be true or false. According to some estimates, there are over 4,000 religions. I find it difficult to believe that one religion is true. If the God who is preached does not exist, then it is fraud, and all the people giving money to the church and spending their Sundays praying to a God who doesn't exist are being defrauded of their money and their time. What if I convinced a group of people that they should pray to my unicorn God? What if I convinced them to give my church 10% of their income? It may be legal to do this, but it is still fraud, and it violates the Golden Rule in the same way that stealing from someone's wallet does. I am critical of religions for the fraud they perpetrate and the propaganda they spew to their members by appealing to greed and fear with heaven and hell. They propagandize children before their reasoning skills are sufficiently developed to decide for themselves. I am critical of the divisions they create and of the wars they ignite. As a former Catholic, I don't know how anyone can practice Catholicism after the rampant pedophilia and the extent to which child rapists were protected by the church. Having said that, many religions do a lot of good in this world, and I would rather have 1,000 religions than one government. Murray Rothbard in Anatomy of the State defined government, and in doing so defined the major difference between the state and a church or a business. Briefly, the state is that organization in society which attempts to maintain a monopoly of the use of force and violence in a given territorial area. In particular, it is the only organization in society that obtains its revenue not by voluntary contribution or payment for services rendered, but by coercion. While other individuals or institutions obtain their income by production of goods and services and by the peaceful and voluntary sale of these goods and services to others, the state obtains its revenue by the use of compulsion. That is, by the threat of the jailhouse and the bayonet. Let's analyze how government violates the Golden Rule. I will be using the U.S. government as my main example here, simply because I am an American citizen and the United States is the most powerful empire the world has ever known. It does not mean that I believe other governments to be moral. They are all immoral. We don't have to be very advanced on Kohlberg's moral development scale to understand that murder is immoral. If it is immoral for you and me to murder, it is also immoral for a group of people called the U.S. government to murder. Was it murder when the U.S. military, ordered by politicians, killed 3 million Vietnamese during the Vietnam War? How about the thousands of civilians and children killed in Laos by leftover U.S. anti-personnel bombs? What about the 600,000 Cambodians killed in the massive U.S. bombing campaign? What about the 500,000 Iraqi children who died because of U.S. sanctions? Or, more recently, the hundreds of thousands of Iraqis who have died for the crime of non-existent weapons of mass destruction? According to a study conducted by R.J. Rummel at the University of Hawaii, governments around the world have murdered 250 to 300 million people over the past 100 years. This count does not include soldiers. Democide, or death by government, is the biggest killer on Earth. Who funds this democide? This is where the horror story has a sick twist. We pay for our own democides. It is the taxpayers who support the government, and without the support of the taxpayer, it would be difficult to purchase guns, bullets, soldiers, and all the trappings of war. And, in the event of the Federal Reserve, we also pay through inflation. So, even if you don't pay taxes, if you have any money whatsoever, you help to fund your own tyranny and oppression through the loss of purchasing power of your money. Banking and debt often play an integral role in enabling democides, but ultimately it is the people who are saddled with the debt. The use of violence to compel support is what differentiates government from a church or a business. In the case of the hypothetical bank I mentioned earlier, I can simply withdraw my money and choose to no longer do business with that entity. In the church example, I can simply stop going. Even the most fervent supporters of the church can't force me to attend or to donate money. Through taxation and inflation, the government can and does use force and violence to fund all its operations. If you doubt that taxation is force and violence, consider what happens if you do not pay your taxes. At first, you will receive threatening letters from the IRS. If you ignore the letters and do not pay the taxes owed, eventually men with guns will come to your home, take you by force, and lock you up in a cage. In that cage, you may be beaten and raped. With inflation, the loss of your purchasing power is the moral equivalent of a thief in the night. Governments cannot exist without theft and extortion. Everything a government has and everything it does is funded this way. Extortion is committed when taxpayers pay because they are afraid to go to jail, and theft when men with guns show up, take property, and enforce fines. Good ideas don't require violence. Amazon doesn't have to force me to buy ebooks. I do so because of the great selection and the cool Whisper Sync feature. My neighbors don't have to force me to buy their beef. I do so because it's a great value and it tastes great. Government is a bad idea that's propped up by violence, like the bully who prefers to steal lunch money over doing chores. How many patriotic Americans would pay their taxes if it was optional? We all know the answer to that question. Imagine that you have a business building houses, and your customers have to buy your houses whether they want to or not. There is no competition, nor will there ever be. And if you want a raise, you simply vote one for yourself, forcing your customers to pay more for their houses. Your customers are free to complain, but they are not free to stop buying your houses. They can fire some of your employees and hire new employees, but they have to keep buying those houses, no matter what the quality is. They can complain about the quality, but still they have to buy your houses. Under these conditions, what incentive do you have to work really hard and to make the best houses you can?
In reality, it's not about the houses. It's about maintaining the power and control over your customers. It's about keeping the gravy train running. So when your customers call to complain, you put them on hold or you tell them to F off. What do you care? It's not like they can go anywhere else for a house. You jail any customers who fail to pay their bill. You threaten others to keep the money rolling in. This is the nature of government. Is it any wonder that the government destroys everything it touches? Is it any wonder that government power and size grows unchecked like a cancer? Government does not have to do a good job. They do not have to satisfy customers. They do not have to be profitable. They do not have to be something that we want. They just have to make sure that we continue to pledge our financial support. That's what the violence is for, because in a truly free society, we would never pay for our own oppression. So yes, the U.S. government is immoral, and so is every other government on the planet. There is one way government could be moral: allow for competing currencies, breaking the Federal Reserve's monopoly on money, and make all taxation optional.